All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at something that honestly plays out all the time in our life. Consumer behavior. I'm really excited about the stuff you shared with me for this episode, specifically a chapter that goes really deep into the world of consumer markets, like what actually makes us decide to buy the things we do. So in this deep dive, what we really want to do is, pull out the big ideas, highlight maybe some things that are kind of surprising, and give everyone listening a good way to think about this whole thing, like why we buy what we buy. And we'll try to do it without getting too bogged down with all the academic jargon. Let's get into it, right?
Yeah, it's pretty wild right now.
Ah.
We kind of like to think we're totally calling the shots with our choices, but there's a lot going on under the surface that shapes what we end up buying. And you know what? It's not just important for companies to figure this out. I mean, it can actually help each of us understand our own decision-making a little bit better.
I totally agree. So the chapter starts off by defining the main players in this whole thing. Like first, you've got the consumer market, which is basically all of us, right? We're all buying goods and services, stuff for ourselves. And then there's this idea of consumer buyer behavior, which is really just the way we, as those consumers, actually make those buying decisions.
Yeah, totally. And it might seem like a pretty simple thing, but the chapter really hammers home the point that it's actually super complex. Just think about all the purchases that are made every single day by, millions and millions of people. Trying to find any sort of pattern in all that, that takes some serious work. It's kind of like cracking a code. If you're a company and you're trying to sell something, if you can understand this consumer behavior, you've pretty much found the key to what people want. I mean, that's huge for any of us too, right? It's super relevant to understand why we're drawn to certain things or why some marketing campaigns actually work. And then the chapter goes on to break down these four big factors that shape how we behave as buyers. The first one is cultural factors, which feels like, I don't know, kind of the foundation of it all.
Oh, yeah, it absolutely is. Think about culture as the basic set of values, perceptions, even desires and behaviors that we as members of a society just kind of absorb. We learn it mainly from our families and the big institutions around us. It's the broadest, most overarching influence. And within a culture, you have all these subcultures, right? Groups that share even more specific values based on their common experiences. This could be nationality, religion, ethnicity, even where you geographically live. And then you've got social class, the relatively permanent layers within a society where people in the same class tend to have similar values, similar interests, similar behaviors. It's kind of crazy how much this stuff is just ingrained in us without us even realizing it, right? And the chapter has a really good example of this in action. It talks about State Farm Insurance and how they actually change their advertising to match different languages. Like they have separate campaigns for Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Spanish. It shows you how important it is for companies to really acknowledge and even respect those cultural differences.
Totally. If you take a step back and look at the bigger picture, you realize that a marketing campaign that might do amazingly well in one cultural context might totally bomb or even accidentally offend people in a different context. And language is really just scratching the surface. Think about all the differences in people's core values, even the symbols they use, or even nonverbal communication. This stuff can completely change how people receive a message.
Okay, so we've talked about the big picture influence of culture, but let's zoom in a bit to something a little more, I don't know, personal. The next factor is social factors, which is where all those connections we have with other people really come into play. And the chapter spends a lot of time talking about groups and social networks.
Yeah, and this is a huge one. I mean, we're social creatures, right? Our decisions about what to buy are constantly being shaped by the groups we're in, or even the groups we want to be in. You've got what are called reference groups, groups that we use as a kind of measuring stick, either directly or not, when we're figuring out our own attitudes or behaviors. It could be a group you actually belong to, or maybe it's what they call an aspirational group, a group you admire and kind of want to be like. The chapter also talks about opinion leaders, people within a reference group who, because they seem to know what they're talking about, or they have a certain personality, or maybe they just have some special quality, end up influencing others.
Oh, opinion leaders, yeah. I mean, we all have those people in our lives, right? Those friends or family members whose recommendations we trust way more than some random ad. And then you get into this whole idea of word of mouth influence and buzz marketing.
Exact. Word of mouth is super powerful because it feels more real. It's coming from someone you actually trust, not just from a company trying to sell you something. And buzz marketing takes that even further. Companies intentionally try to find or even create those opinion leaders to help spread the word and generate excitement about a product. Think about brand ambassadors and influencer marketing. The chapter even mentions people like Cristiano Ronaldo and Selena Gomez.
Right. Those are like the big names that can really create a ton of buzz.
Yeah.
But the chapter also makes a really interesting point about not putting all your eggs in one basket with those mega influencers. They bring up this idea of micro influencers, which seems like is becoming a bigger and bigger deal.
Yeah, that's a really important distinction. A celebrity might reach millions of people, but these micro-influencers usually have a smaller but much more dedicated audience. And their recommendations feel more personal, more genuine, so they can have a really powerful effect on those people. It just goes to show how the whole marketing world is changing. And of course, we can't forget about family. For most people, their family is the most important reference group of all. And the roles we play in society, even our social status, all of that affects our buying decisions too.
For sure. Okay, so moving right along, the third big factor is personal factors. This is where it starts to get really specific to each individual, right?
You got it. These are the characteristics that are completely unique to each person. The chapter talks about stuff like age and where you are in your life. What you need and want obviously changes as you go through different phases. Then there's your occupation. What you do for a living definitely affects what you buy. And of course, your economic situation is huge. Your income, your savings, how much you can borrow, all of that plays a role.
Right, and then it gets into lifestyle, which the chapter calls psychographics. That's a word that might need a little explaining.
Yeah, good point. So demographics are the who, things like age, income, where you live. Psychographics are the why. What are your interests? What do you value? Are you the kind of person who loves adventure and travel, or do you prefer to stay close to home? It's about really understanding a person's activities, interests, opinions. It paints a much more complete picture than just demographics alone. And finally, there's personality and self-concept, those unique psychological qualities that basically determine how you interact with the world around you. The idea here is that people often choose brands that they feel match their own personality or the image they want to project.
I can totally see that. Like my own lifestyle and how I see myself, that definitely influences some of the stuff I buy. Okay, so we've made it to the last of the big four psychological factors. Now we're getting into the real nitty-gritty of why we make the choices we do, right?
Exactly. These are the underlying psychological processes that drive all our buying decisions. And the chapter kicks things off by talking about motivation, using Maslow's hierarchy of needs as a kind of framework. Maybe you can give us a quick refresher on what that is.
Sure thing. It's usually pictured as a pyramid. The most basic needs are at the bottom. Things like food, water, sleep. These are your physiological needs. Once those are more or less taken care of, you move up a level to safety needs. Then come social needs like belonging, love, connection. After that, it's esteem needs, things like recognition and status. And finally, at the very top of the pyramid, you have self-actualization needs, things like fulfilling your potential and growing as a person. The idea is that you have to address those lower level needs before you can really focus on the higher ones.
Yeah, that's a great explanation. And marketers try to connect their products to different levels of this pyramid. Like they're trying to convince you that their product will help you meet those needs, whatever they may be. So after motivation, the chapter talks about perception, how we take in information, how we organize it, and how we make sense of the world around us. And they make a really important point about selective attention.
Right, like how we're bombarded with so much information all the time that our brains basically have to filter it all out. We only let in a tiny fraction of what we're exposed to. And then there's selective distortion, where we tend to interpret information in a way that fits our existing beliefs. And then on top of that, there's selective retention, where we're more likely to remember the good stuff about brands we like and forget the good stuff about brands we don't like. It's like our brains are playing favorites.
It really is. These perceptual processes are super important for marketers to understand. You got to think about all the advertising we see every day. I mean, the chapter even mentions that we might see somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 ads every single day. It's insane. No wonder our brains have developed all these filters. So for a marketer, the challenge isn't just being loud or flashy. It's about finding a way to actually break through that filter and make a real connection.
I mean, 5,000 ads a day, that's mind-blowing. It makes you realize how tough it is for companies to even get noticed. Okay, after perception, the chapter talks about learning and then beliefs and attitudes.
So learning in this context is basically how our behavior changes based on our experiences. Marketers are trying to create those positive experiences with their products and brands. Then you have beliefs, which are just the thoughts we have about something. And then attitudes, which are those more consistent positive or negative feelings and tendencies towards an object or idea. The chapter really emphasizes how difficult it is to change attitudes. That's why marketers often try to position their products in a way that lines up with people's existing attitudes, instead of trying to create totally new ones. It's easier to go with the flow than to try and swim upstream.
That makes a lot of sense. Work smarter, not harder. Right. Okay, so we've talked about all the big influences. Now the chapter gets into the actual buyer decision process. It's not just about impulse buys. There are steps people usually go through.
Totally. The chapter breaks it down into 5 main stages. The first one is need recognition. That moment when you realize you have a problem or you need something. It could be something internal, like feeling hungry, or it could be something external, like seeing an ad for some cool new gadget.
Right, and once you realize you need something, you start looking for information to help you make a good decision. That's information search. And the chapter talks about all the different sources we use for this.
Yep. There are your personal sources, like getting recommendations from friends or family. Then there are commercial sources, like ads and salespeople. There are also public sources, things like online reviews and consumer reports. And finally, there are experiential sources, like trying a sample of something or test driving a car. The chapter points out how important digital sources have become. I mean, we all go to Google and Amazon for everything these days,
We
right?
do. So after you've gathered some information, it's time for the evaluation of alternative stage. This is where you start comparing all your options.
Exactly. Consumers look at different brands based on the features they care about. And what's important to one person might not be important to someone else. This whole evaluation process leads to what's called a consideration set, basically a short list of brands that you're seriously thinking about buying. And the criteria you use to make that list can change a lot depending on the person and the product. Like if you're buying a car, fuel efficiency might be your top priority, but for someone else, it might be safety features.
Right, everyone has their own priorities. And then finally, we get to the big moment, the purchase decision. You've weighed all your options, you've narrowed down your choices, and you're finally ready to buy.
Well, not so fast. The chapter makes a really interesting point here. Just because you intend to buy something doesn't mean you actually will. A couple of things can get in the way. First, other people's opinions can influence you. Like, your friend might tell you to stay away from a certain brand, and that might make you reconsider. And then there are those unexpected things that just happen in life. Maybe you suddenly have to deal with a big expense and you have to change your priorities.
Oh yeah, life always throws curveballs. So the purchase isn't always a done deal, but assuming you do buy it, the final stage is post-purchase behavior. And this is where things get interesting for businesses, right?
100%. This stage is all about building customer satisfaction and loyalty. It's about whether you're happy or unhappy with what you bought. And if you're not happy, you might leave a bad review, which can really hurt a brand's reputation. The chapter also talks about cognitive dissonance, which is that uncomfortable feeling you might get after making a purchase, especially a big one. Like you buy a new laptop and then you start second-guessing yourself and wondering if you should have gone with a different model. Marketers need to figure out how to manage this post-purchase period to try and reduce that dissonance and encourage people to buy from them again. Think about those follow-up emails you get with helpful tips or maybe a special offer. That's a way for businesses to try and make you feel better about your purchase.
It's all about keeping the customer happy. Okay, so we've talked about how people make decisions in general, but the chapter also has a section specifically about the buyer decision process for new products. This feels like a slightly different situation, right?
It is. A new product, in the eyes of a consumer, is any good, service, or even idea that feels new to them. And the chapter lays out this adoption process, which is basically the mental journey someone goes through from first hearing about something new to actually using it regularly. This usually involves 5 stages. Awareness, you just know it exists. Interest, you start looking for more info. Evaluation, you're deciding if it's right for you. Trial, you try it out on a small scale if possible. And finally, adoption. You start using it all the time.
So it's like first you hear about it, then you get curious, then you weigh the pros and cons, maybe try a sample, and then finally decide to fully embrace it.
Yep, that's it. And the thing is, people adopt new things at different speeds, which leads to the idea of adopter categories. The chapter describes 5 of these. Innovators, the people who are always the first to try new things. Early adopters, often opinion leaders. Early mainstream, more careful and practical. Late mainstream, more skeptical. And lagging adopters, the most traditional folks who really resist change. They even give some typical percentages. About 2.5% of people are innovators and about 13.5% are early adopters. And the point is, you need different strategies to reach these different groups.
It's like marketing to different personalities almost. So marketers really need to think about who they're trying to reach. And the chapter also discusses the factors that influence how quickly a new product gets adopted, right?
Yes, absolutely. There are 5 key characteristics of a new product that affect its adoption rate. First is relative advantage, how much better the new product seems compared to the old ones. Then there's compatibility, how well it fits with people's values and experiences. Complexity is another factor. How easy or hard is it to understand and use? Divisibility matters too. Can people try it out before they fully commit? And lastly, there's communicability. How easy is it to explain the benefits of the product to other people? Basically, the more positive these factors are, the faster the product will be adopted.
It's fascinating to see how all this theoretical stuff actually plays out in the real world, and that's where the chapter's discussion of Beyond Meat comes in. It's such a great example of how consumer attitudes can actually shift.
Oh, it's a perfect case study. Beyond Meat was really strategic. They focused on taste and health, trying to appeal to a much wider audience than just vegetarians and vegans. Their marketing often focuses on the experience of eating their products, trying to close that gap with traditional meat.
And they were smart about how they got their products out there, right? They made sure it was in regular grocery stores and partnered with restaurants, making it so much easier for the average person to try it.
For sure. They weren't just stuck in those specialty health food stores. They went mainstream, right where most people already shop for food. The chapter does point out, though, that Beyond Meat still faces a challenge in terms of taste. How their products compare to real meat is a major factor that influences whether people will try it and keep buying it.
But they've also done a really good job of promoting the environmental and ethical benefits of their products, which is a totally different angle. And for a lot of people, those values are a big part of why they choose to buy something.
Absolutely. This ties directly back to those psychological and cultural factors we talked about earlier. More and more, people are concerned about sustainability and ethical sourcing, and that's influencing their buying choices. And the chapter highlights how successful Beyond Meat has been in changing consumer attitudes and behaviors in a market that's traditionally been very need-focused. It's a great example of how understanding and responding to consumer motivations on multiple levels, taste, health, ethics, can really create change.
So we've really gone deep into this world of consumer behavior. And it's obvious that it's not just random. There are so many factors involved: cultural, social, personal, psychological. And the journey we take as buyers from realizing we need something, what happens after we buy it, it's a multi-stage process.
And what's really interesting is how all these things are connected.
Mm.
Your cultural background shapes the social groups you belong to, which then shapes your individual lifestyle. And all of that influences your psychological motivations when you're buying something. For companies, understanding this whole dynamic is essential if they want to create effective marketing strategies and build strong relationships with their customers. And for you as a listener, I hope this deep dive has given you some new insights into why you make the choices you do and why other people do the things they do.
Absolutely. It's been super insightful. So, after learning about all these influences on consumer behavior, do you think your own purchasing decisions might be a little more predictable than you thought? Was there a moment during this conversation that made you go, aha, about your own buying habits or someone else's? We've really just scratched the surface here. Think about how all these principles apply to, well, everything really, from your next grocery run to some of the big decisions you might make in life. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.